Elon Musk does not have money. Not really. Not in the way you have money. Not sitting in a bank account somewhere waiting to be spent. At the peak of his wealth, Elon Musk was worth over $300 billion on paper. $300 billion. And yet, if you asked him to write a personal check for $10 billion tomorrow, he almost certainly could not do it without selling something first. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett. The same story runs through almost every name on that list. The richest people on earth are technically broke. And understanding exactly why that is true is going to change the way you think about money permanently. Because here is the thing that nobody explains when they talk about billionaire wealth. The number you see next to their name, the $200 billion, the $150 billion, or the $80 billion, that number is not money. It is not sitting anywhere. It cannot be spent. It is a calculation, a valuation, a figure that exists on a spreadsheet somewhere based on what the market says their assets are worth on any given day. And on a different day, that number could be completely different. Elon Musk lost more than $200 billion in a single year at one point. Not because he spent it, not because he made bad decisions with cash in his bank account, but because the value of his assets on paper changed. The number went down. The actual money, whatever cash he actually had, barely moved. This is not a loophole. This is not an accident. This is the system. And the wealthiest people on earth did not just stumble into it. They understood it deliberately. They built their entire financial lives around it. And the reason most ordinary people never understand how it works is because the financial system profits enormously from that confusion. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how the wealthiest people on earth actually manage their money, why they structure their wealth the way they do, what the tax implications of that structure are, and most importantly, what any of this actually means for your own financial life. Drop in the comments right now when you hear that someone is worth $10 billion. Do you picture them sitting on $10 billion in cash? Because almost everyone does. And almost everyone is completely wrong. Keep watching because what comes next is going to change how you see wealth permanently. Let us start with the most important concept in this entire video, the difference between net worth and liquidity. Net worth is the total value of everything you own minus everything you owe. If you own a house worth $400,000 and you have a mortgage of $250,000, your net worth from that asset is $150,000. You are not sitting on $150,000 in cash. You cannot spend $150,000 today. The $150,000 is locked inside the house. It only becomes real. It only becomes spendable when you sell the house and convert that value into cash. Until then, it is theoretical. It is a number on paper that represents what you might get if you converted the asset into money. Now scale that concept up to billionaire level, and you begin to understand what is actually happening. When people say Elon Musk is worth $200 billion, what they mean is that the combined value of his ownership stakes in Tesla, SpaceX, X, and his other ventures calculated at whatever the current market price of those assets is, adds up to approximately $200 billion minus whatever he owes. That is his net worth. But the vast majority of that $200 billion is not cash. It is shares, it is equity, it is ownership stakes in companies, and shares are only worth what someone is willing to pay for them on any given day. They cannot be spent like money. They have to be sold first. And selling large quantities of shares in a publicly traded company is not as simple as it sounds. It triggers tax events, it moves markets, it signals things to investors, and in many cases, it is subject to legal restrictions that prevent large shareholders from selling freely whenever they choose. So, the billionaire sits on top of this enormous theoretical number while their actual day-to-day financial life runs on something considerably more modest. And this is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Tell me in the comments, did you know that most billionaires actively avoid having large amounts of cash? And keep watching, because the reason why is not what most people assume. Let us talk about how billionaires actually access money without selling their assets. Because this is the mechanism that most people have never heard of, and that explains almost everything about how extreme wealth actually functions. The answer is loans. Specifically, a structure that financial insiders call buy, borrow, die. And once you understand how it works, you are going to feel a very specific and completely justified frustration about the way the financial system is structured. Here is how it works. A billionaire owns $10 billion worth of stock in a company. They do not want to sell that stock because selling it would trigger a capital gains tax bill of potentially hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. So instead of selling, they go to a bank and they use their stock as collateral for a loan. The bank looks at the $10 billion in stock and says, we will lend you $5 billion at a low interest rate, and you can use your stock as security. If you cannot repay the loan, we get the stock. The billionaire takes out the $5 billion loan. They use it to fund their lifestyle, their other investments, their philanthropic activities, or whatever they choose. And here is the critical part. The loan is not income. Loans are not taxed. There is no income tax on borrowed money because borrowed money is not earnings. It is debt. It has to be repaid. Which means the billionaire has just accessed $5 billion in spendable funds without paying a single dollar of income tax on it. Meanwhile, the $10 billion in stock they used as collateral continues to sit there, continues to grow in value, continues to generate returns. The asset does not move. The value keeps compounding. And the loan, which was taken at a low interest rate, often below the rate at which the underlying assets are growing, gets managed or refinanced or eventually repaid from future asset growth. This is not illegal. This is not a conspiracy. This is standard practice among the ultra-wealthy, and it is facilitated by the largest banks in the world who compete aggressively for the business of the ultra-high net worth client because the fees generated from managing that kind of wealth are significant. Now let us talk about the die part of buy, borrow, die. Because this is where the structure becomes genuinely extraordinary and where the frustration most people feel when they understand it is completely understandable. When a person dies, their assets pass to their heirs. And in the United States, when an asset is inherited, the cost basis of that asset, the original purchase price for tax purposes, resets to its current market value. This is called a step up in basis. And it means that if a billionaire bought stock at $1 per share 40 years ago and it is now worth $1,000 per share, their heirs inherited at the $1,000 value. The $999 per share gained the capital appreciation that accumulated over 40 years essentially disappears for tax purposes. The heirs can sell the stock at $1,000 and pay capital gains tax only on growth above $1,000. The 40 years of accumulated gains that the original owner never paid tax on simply evaporate from the tax record. The loan that was taken against the assets gets repaid from the estate. The heirs inherit the remaining wealth, and the cycle buy assets, borrow against them, pass them to the next generation. With the accumulated gains wiped clean for tax purposes, can begin again. This is legal. This is documented. This is how it works for a significant proportion of the wealthiest families in America. And it sits in such sharp contrast to the financial reality of most ordinary working people who pay income tax on every dollar they earn, who cannot borrow cheaply against assets they do not have, whose estates do not benefit from a step up in basis in any meaningful way because the assets involved are not large enough for it to matter. That understanding it tends to produce a very strong reaction. Has this changed how you see the wealth gap in America? Tell me in the comments. Because what comes next is the part that connects all of this directly to your own financial life. Now let us talk about what billionaires actually own. Because the structure of their wealth is not random. It is deliberately constructed to minimize tax, maximize growth, and maintain control. The overwhelming majority of billionaire wealth is held in one of three forms. equity in private or public companies, real estate, and financial instruments like bonds or alternative investments. Very little of it is held in cash, and that is entirely intentional. Cash is a bad asset for someone who is thinking about long-term wealth preservation. Cash loses value to inflation every year it sits still. Cash generates almost no return. And cash sitting in a bank account above a certain threshold is taxed, insured up to limited amounts, and subject to various regulatory complications at very high levels. For someone who is managing wealth at the billion-dollar scale, holding significant amounts of cash is actually financially irrational. The goal is to hold appreciating assets and access liquidity through borrowing when needed, rather than through liquidation. Now here is the number that should genuinely stop you for a moment. In a single year, Elon Musk's paper wealth dropped by more than $200 billion. $200 billion evaporated from his net worth in 12 months. And yet his lifestyle did not collapse, his businesses did not close, his ability to fund his activities did not disappear. Because the $200 billion that vanished was never money in the first place. It was a market valuation, a number on a spreadsheet. And when market valuations change, the number changes, but the underlying assets, the companies, the factories, the technology, and the intellectual property continue to exist and generate value regardless of what the stock price says on any particular day. This is a fundamentally different relationship with wealth than most ordinary people have. Most people experience their net worth as money. Their house, their savings, their retirement account, these feel like money because they are the closest thing to money most people have. But for a billionaire, the relationship is different. Wealth is not money. Wealth is productive assets that generate returns and that can be used as collateral to access liquidity when needed. Money, actual cash, is almost beside the point. Understanding this distinction is not just an interesting intellectual exercise. It has direct implications for how you think about building your own wealth. Because the principle that underlies the billionaire financial structure owning appreciating assets, minimizing the conversion of those assets into taxable events, and letting the assets compound over time is not exclusively available to billionaires. It is available to anyone who understands it and applies it at whatever scale their income allows. Now let us talk about taxes. Because the tax dimension of billionaire wealth is the part that generates the most controversy and the most confusion. And the confusion is largely deliberate. You have probably heard the statistic that some billionaires pay a lower effective tax rate than their secretaries. Warren Buffett famously pointed this out himself. And when most people hear it, they assume it means billionaires are cheating somehow, breaking rules, exploiting loopholes that are technically illegal. That is not what is happening. What is happening is considerably more systematic and considerably more legal than that. Here is the fundamental structure of how income tax works. Income tax applies to income, wages, salaries, dividends, interest payments. These are all forms of income, and they are taxed at rates that can reach 37% at the federal level for high earners in the United States. Capital gains tax applies when an asset is sold for more than it was purchased for. Long-term capital gains on assets held for more than a year are taxed at a maximum rate of 20% at the federal level. And unrealized gains, the increase in value of an asset that has not been sold, are not taxed at all. Until the asset is sold, there is no taxable event regardless of how much the value has increased. Now, consider the financial life of a typical billionaire. They do not earn a large salary. Many of the most prominent billionaires, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Ellison, have at various points taken annual salaries of $1 or no salary at all from their companies. Their wealth comes not from salary, but from the increasing value of their equity stakes. And since they are not selling that equity, they are borrowing against it. Instead, there is no taxable event. No capital gains to report, no income to declare. The wealth grows, the loans fund the lifestyle, and the tax bill remains minimal. Meanwhile, a nurse earning $80,000 a year pays income tax on every dollar of that $80,000. A teacher earning $55,000 pays income tax on every dollar. A construction worker earning $65,000 pays income tax on every dollar. Their income is taxed at the point it is earned, with no option to defer, no asset to borrow against, and no step-up in basis waiting for their heirs. This is not a secret. This is documented, publicly discussed, and regularly debated in Congress. Various proposals to tax unrealized gains to apply a tax to the increasing value of assets, even before they are sold, have been put forward and consistently failed to become law. The lobbying operation that keeps the current structure in place is one of the most well-funded in American political history, and the beneficiaries of the current structure have both the resources and the motivation to ensure it stays exactly as it is. Now let us talk about something that connects all of this to a conversation you probably need to have with yourself about your own financial life. The billionaire wealth structure own appreciating assets, borrow against them to access liquidity, minimize taxable events. Let compound growth run is not a strategy that requires $1 billion to implement in principle. What it requires is a shift in how you think about the difference between income and assets. Between earning money and owning things that grow in value, most ordinary people are entirely dependent on income. They earn a salary, they spend most of it, they save a fraction, the saving earns minimal interest. And they hope that over 40 years of working, the fraction they saved accumulates into something meaningful. This is the financial structure that the school system prepared most people earn. Spend. Save what is left. Hope. The billionaire structure is different in its fundamental orientation. The goal is not to earn and save. The goal is to own, to accumulate ownership stakes in things that grow in value over time. Businesses, real estate, stocks, index funds, things that appreciate, things that can eventually be used as collateral, things that compound. The scale is obviously different. A person earning $60,000 a year cannot borrow $5 billion against their stock portfolio, but the same person can own index funds, can own a home that appreciates in value, can build equity in a business, can accumulate ownership stakes in productive assets that grow over time without requiring them to work harder or longer. The principle is the same, even if the scale is incomparably smaller. Here is what the channel that exposed you to the billionaire tax structure wants you to take away from this video. Understanding how the system works at the top does not just make you angry. It makes you smarter about how you build your own financial life. Because every principle that underlies billionaire wealth management, owning appreciating assets, minimizing unnecessary tax events, letting compound growth run, and using debt strategically rather than destructively is available to you at your scale right now. The billionaire did not invent these principles. The billionaire just applied them more aggressively and at a larger scale than most people realized was possible. Now, let us talk about some specific things that billionaires do that ordinary people can actually learn from. The first is that they pay themselves last, not first. Most people receive their salary and immediately pay their bills, their lifestyle costs, their subscriptions, and whatever is left, if anything, goes towards savings or investment. Billionaires and the wealthy people below them in the wealth distribution who are genuinely building something do the opposite. They decide in advance how much they are going to invest, and that amount leaves their account first. The lifestyle gets funded from whatever is left. This sounds simple. It is simple. And it is one of the most consistently repeated pieces of advice from every serious financial educator across every study of wealth building behavior. Pay yourself first. Invest before you spend. Let the lifestyle adjust to what remains, rather than letting the lifestyle consume everything and investing what is left over, which is usually nothing. The second is that they think in assets, not income. A billionaire does not think about how much they earn per year. They think about what they own and what that ownership is worth and how it is growing. Shifting your own mental model from income-focused to asset-focused is one of the most significant changes an ordinary person can make in how they approach their financial life. Every financial decision every purchase, every expense, every commitment runs through a filter that asks not just, can I afford this from my income, but does this help me accumulate assets, or does it take me further from accumulating assets? The third is that they are extremely careful about lifestyle inflation. The paradox of billionaire wealth is that many of the wealthiest people in the world lived remarkably modest lifestyles during the period when they were building their wealth. Warren Buffett still lives in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska that he bought in 1958 for $31,500. Not because he cannot afford anything else, because lifestyle expansion is one of the most reliable destroyers of wealth accumulation, and the people who understand wealth deeply understand this. Every dollar spent on an upgraded lifestyle is a dollar that is not compounding in a productive asset. Now, here is the honest reality that needs to be said clearly before this video ends. The billionaire financial structure as it currently exists is not a fair system. It is not designed to be fair. It is a system that has evolved over decades to protect and grow large concentrations of wealth in ways that are structurally unavailable to most ordinary people, regardless of how hard they work or how smart their decisions are. The buy, borrow, die mechanism is not available to someone who does not have significant assets to borrow against. The step up in basis is not meaningful for someone whose estate consists of a modest house and a small retirement account. The ability to take a $1 salary and live off borrowed money while your equity stake grows is not available to someone who needs every dollar of their paycheck to cover rent and food. Understanding this is not defeatist, it is honest. An honest understanding of how the system works is the only foundation for making genuinely informed decisions about your own financial life. What this video has shown you is that the wealth you see attached to the names on the billionaire list is not money in any meaningful sense of the word. It is a valuation, a number that represents the theoretical worth of assets that are not liquid, cannot be easily spent, and exist primarily as collateral for the borrowing that funds the lifestyle and as vehicles for the compound growth that generates the next generation of wealth. The billionaires are technically broke in the sense that most people understand wealth, and they are extraordinarily wealthy in the sense that actually matters. They own productive assets that generate returns, that grow in value, and that can be passed to the next generation with the accumulated tax liability essentially erased. That is the system. Now you understand it. And really understanding it, puts you in a position to think more clearly about your own financial decisions than most people around you ever will. Next video, pulling apart another company or another system that is quietly working against your financial future in ways you have not fully seen yet. You're going to want to be there for that one. If this video changed how you see the wealth of the people at the very top and what it actually means for the rest of us, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the conversation this video started is one that most people spend their entire lives never having.